Okay.
There we go. Okay.
Thank you. Before I share the PowerPoint, it's helpful for me to just see how people are, what the knowledge is around Housing First and how people feel about it, so that we can, so that I'm not talking like too basic or too advanced or missing some big point that people are interested in. So you can either put in the chat or come off mute and say, you know, how you feel about Housing First, what you know about Housing First, just to kind of give me some background on where people are at. Deanna says she's very familiar with Housing First. Great. Hopefully I won't bore you then. Okay, but we've got some that aren't familiar at all. All right, so wide audience. So that's good. So oh, good. Thanks, Deanna. Deanna says I always love hearing about it. Thanks, Arida. In favor of Housing First, even. So I'm Emily Kenny. I am the president of the Wisconsin Housing First Coalition, and the coalition started, gosh, probably now about 5 years ago. We got together, and how that happened was that you know, the research on Housing First started like in the 80s, and in, I don't know, like the 2010s, HUD started saying, hey, agencies need to be housing first. And so now, for those that are familiar with the big CoC NOFO process, which is where CoCs get most of their funding from, the HUD started saying you must attest to being housing first if you want to get funded as a housing agency. And so far there hasn't been you know, a lot more than that. It's kind of like a checkbox, and different CoCs handle being housing first differently and kind of proving that. But it is now a requirement. So when I talk to groups that are in CoCs, I get kind of a mixed bag, because I think people react to requirements differently. Especially, I will say that I think that Housing First has been a term that's been thrown out there without a lot of backup and support for how to actually do it. And so what I was seeing, I should say that for my day job, I am I work at Impact, which is the lead agency for our coordinated entry system for Milwaukee County. So that's, so I'm, you know, seeing this happen all day long, where we're getting people and getting into housing in a housing first way. And I just saw that while we were struggling as agencies to try to do this thing that we believe in, we couldn't do it fully, because we did not have the support of our local decision makers for how to fully implement Housing First. And so as I was talking to folks that are that I knew within the legislature, they said, you know, you can talk about this as a person or even as an agency, but you would be stronger if you created a coalition, and so then you have lots of voices. So that's kind of how the coalition started, and we're still building. As you can imagine, the folks that are part of this are also very busy doing their day jobs with working with people experiencing homelessness. So, but we're building, and we have kind of a twofold approach. One is to educate decision makers on what Housing First is and how they can support and advocate for that support. But the other is, and part of why I'm here today, thank you, Teresa, for the invitation, is to talk to people that are providing services of all types, but including housing services, so that they have a good understanding of what Housing First is. I think the mandate happened without a lot of explanation about how to fully implement. And so the Housing First Coalition has a goal of helping agencies across the state implement Housing First. I will give the caveat that I have no answers. I have some suggestions, but I have no answers. And really, one of the things that I have learned is that each community needs to figure out how they implement kind of for themselves, and then we can go up to the state and how the state kind of supports that. So So there's my preamble. I will jump into the presentation and then I'll kind of stop throughout for questions and discussion. I think I have until about 10 o'clock. Is that right, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm going to share and then make this.
You can even go a
slideshow.
little longer if people have a lot of questions.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Okay, so for those that are completely unfamiliar with Housing First, this is the graphic that I use to explain it. The top line is what we used to do, and I started my career as a street outreach worker in, about 13 years ago. That's crazy that it's been that long. But at that time, we were not using a Housing First approach to housing folks. And we had this very linear path to housing, which we call the housing readiness path. The idea behind housing readiness is that people that are experiencing homelessness are homeless because there is something that they, in their lives, that they need to fix so that they can then pay for their own housing. So there's some reason, there's something about them that they need to fix to be housed. And along that way, our job as service providers was to discover what that was, help them fix it, and then help them learn how to be housed. And so the way that we did that was through having this linear pathway and into permanent housing. Started with shelter. And in emergency shelter at that time, first of all, to get in, there were, it was a high barrier, right? So often you would find drug screening and breathalyzers. I would see a lot of job charts, right? So you have to fill out, you have to apply for these 5 jobs and you have to prove which jobs you're applying for. There were a lot of rules at the shelter, and some of that is to kind of keep things safe, but some of it I would say was above and beyond. When I was in grad school, my job was in a shelter, and my whole job was to walk around and make sure that, you know, rooms were clean enough, beds were made, chores were completed. And if that didn't happen, it was my job to ask people to leave and kick them out of shelter. And the thinking was that this was teaching people how to be housed. I give this example because my bed is not made right now, and I have a house. So maybe making one's bed does not equate to, you know, being ready to be housed. And it says, you know, here are the fail points. So if you didn't do those things, if you didn't address the things that you were being asked to address, you'd kind of go back over to the end of the line and then try again. But you couldn't progress if you didn't do these things first. And then we had this transitional housing next phase, which is for about 2 years. And that was really where the learning came in our mindset. That was really where we were teaching all of these skills. And what that looked like was a case manager coming and saying, you know, these are the things that you need to do so that you can go be housed on your own. And I often looked at getting a job, increasing your income. We continued to focus on medical and mental health. For families, there was a lot around school and getting kids into school, making sure that they were doing well. And still a lot of rules in terms of, you know, there was regular drug testing, breathalyzers, that kind of thing. House cleanliness or room cleanliness in transitional housing still pertained. But you could, you know, fail out and go back to the end of the line over here. But if you did all those things, you could get into permanent housing, which still at that time had things like, you know, breathalyzers, checking to see which guests you have over, lots of rules. You need to complete these things. You need to do these things in order to keep this housing. And when we were switching over to Housing First, I'll just share, there was a lot of opposition from our permanent housing providers saying, but we need some carrot to make sure that they stay in housing, that they do what we want them to do, essentially, so that they stay in the housing. And if we can't kick them out of housing, why would they do what we want them to do? I'll talk about that in a minute. But so there were programs that would literally, we had case managers that worked second shift so that they could pop in unannounced at people's apartments, their own apartment, their permanent place to live, pop in to see who was there and what they were doing. And you know, this is Wisconsin. It is common, I think, for people to drink in Wisconsin, in all states, but especially here. And so people in their own apartment being breathalyzed and expected to stay abstinent just to keep their apartment. I'm guessing that a lot of us on this call would no longer be in housing if that was a rule for us. So what happened is people were failing. So we had a homelessness count that was rising, and kind of was plateauing, but certainly wasn't going down. This is my personal opinion. I should do a research study and see if I can back it up. But I wonder, and even would propose that we have chronic homelessness because of this pathway. What ended up happening in the Milwaukee community, and I hope that I'm not just speaking for Milwaukee, I'm guessing that you can see this in other communities, is we had a group of people that had failed out of every shelter, every transitional housing, and every permanent housing program that we had. And so they were just out. They were just out. And we were not ending homelessness. So when I tell people this, you know, there are things that feel good about this process. And there are some that often react with, well, yes, if you're not expecting people to kind of change things about their lives, like, what are we doing? Why would we just give people housing? The biggest point that I think is important when thinking about Housing First is that Housing First is a model that has been found to be cost effective and effective at reducing people experiencing homelessness, reducing the number of people experiencing homelessness in communities. It has not yet. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but you know, change in people's lives takes a long time. And so the question is, do we want people to be housed while that's happening? Or do we want them to be homeless while that's happening? So it's kind of a moral question for me. Housing First flips all of this on its head and takes the person experiencing homelessness, gives them immediate access to permanent housing that is theirs, while then providing the supports to work on all of the things that we worked on kind of in this line, as long as you were doing what you needed to do in a program, in order for them to achieve life stability. And I'll talk a little bit more about the principles of Housing First in a little bit, but what this looks like, I'll use my making the bed example. What this looks like is that the services switch from being focused on, I'm telling you what you need to do, to here's your home. How do you want to live now? And so the making the bed example, you know, making your bed does not mean that you can't be housed. But if you are so disorganized that, you know, it's not just that the bed isn't made, but that nothing is put away, that trash is everywhere, that, you know, things are just a mess, and the unit becomes uninhabitable, that's problematic for you keeping your housing. So instead of me saying you didn't make your bed, you're out, the conversation becomes, this is something that if you want to keep this apartment, we've got to figure this out. So how can I support you in this? So I'm not coming to check and see if your bed's made. I'm coming to see, how are you doing in your apartment? And are there things that are concerning that I can support you through so that you can maintain your housing? So the services, the approach becomes a little bit different. All right, thank you. Holly, I'm just seeing the chat that Halo is not a high barrier shelter. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm also so glad that that you talked about shelter, because, you know, Housing First is housing focused, but we, you know, until we have drastic change and we have housing readily available for everybody, anytime there's a crisis, we will always need emergency shelter. And shelters can implement housing first principles, even if they're not if it's not an apartment or a housing program. So thank you, Holly, for that. Okay, so that was my long explanation of housing first. Housing first is not housing only. That is probably the biggest pushback that I hear when I do these presentations is, so you're just going to give people apartments and walk away? And the answer is no, that is not what housing first is. And if you're implementing housing first that way, you're not fully implementing it. I did a presentation where a case manager, former case manager, he told me in the presentation, told the whole group that he quit his job because of housing first. So afterwards, he came up to talk to me and he said, what was happening is I was housing all these folks. This was rural. So he had like 4 counties that he was responsible for. And he didn't have enough time to really serve all of the clients and see all of them. And they were struggling in their apartments and then getting evicted. And he just felt like in his head, housing first was we just house people. And I said, it sounds like your agency did not have the support that you needed to fully implement housing first. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. It is not a one project or one program. So there was another community that was like, this is our housing first building. And I'll talk about why that's not housing first. I mean, that building can be there, yay, but just one building is not housing first. It's not in isolation of community resources. And it doesn't have to be only PSH or HUD funded. We can do housing first with other funding streams. We can do it with rapid rehousing. In fact, we're supposed to do it with rapid rehousing programs. So what it is a culture and mindset shift. We'll talk about affordable housing in just a minute, Holly. That's a good point. Okay, so these are the housing first principles, and I kind of want to talk through each one and how you might implement them. But notice that only one has immediate access to housing. There are 4 others that we need to be paying attention to fully implement housing first. So immediate access to housing, consumer choice and self-determination, having a recovery orientation, individualized and client-driven supports, and community integration. So we'll talk through each of these a little bit, and then hopefully there will be some discussion. Okay, so access to housing is, if you don't have access to housing, then it's really hard to be housing first, right? Because you don't have apartments to have people go into. And this can be through affordable housing, through like general community affordable housing, as long as the services are there to pair with it. Most communities utilize vouchers systemically in order to make sure that people are being housed regardless of ability to pay. I will also say, I have to share this because there was one person another case manager that came up after a presentation and said, I'm really trying, but people just keep getting evicted and because their income is too low. And when we talked about it a little bit further, she was in a community, again, rural, that does not have any HUD vouchers. There's no HUD vouchers in that county. And so she was putting people into apartments, but without their income being able to pay the full rent, which of course resulted in them being evicted. So in each community, the first task is to figure out how are we going to have vouchers, whether that's through like a HUD grant, or perhaps there's a different kind of partnership. We recently in Milwaukee, Children's Wisconsin has started paying for vouchers. So we took some of this to businesses. We don't have any businesses paying for housing yet, but we do have them paying for some of the services. So kind of that building up a presentation like this, and then talking through to people that might have money and might be able to support housing is one strategy to use. So the other thing that HUD is encouraging and that we've just started doing in Milwaukee, but maybe you guys are even further along in Racine, is partnering with Section 8 and housing authorities to utilize vouchers. So that's the first kind of trick, is to figure out the voucher piece. Judith, I see your question. Yes, we can make these slides available. And then making sure that there are no barriers to entry. And this is something that is, I think, easier said than done. We can even have the mindset of not having any barriers, but a lot of our housing programs have, like section, I just said section 8, but there are a lot of requirements for section 8. So figuring out how we can be creative with having vouchers from different funding sources to figure out if there's, a couple of programs at least that can just take people, even if they don't have a birth certificate, for example. And another piece of no barrier to entry is having partnerships with landlords. And this could be a whole presentation on its own, but really focusing on making landlords a part of the team, and so that they know who they're working with. They know that there's a whole CoC of support. They know that there's this is what they're engaged in. They're helping to reduce homelessness in Racine. That's a pretty cool thing. And they're business owners. So it's crucial to figure out how to have landlord incentives, and especially recovery if there is damage done to the unit, so that they're not going under while trying to support housing first. And then also having a variety of housing. So I've focused so much on tenant-based. That's mostly what I've been talking about, is having a tenant-based voucher. That voucher goes with the person, so they can, the benefit to that is that if they are evicted, they can use it again, right? They can go to another apartment with that voucher, or if they want to move, there's that flexibility. But some people need other types of housing. And this is why that one building, doesn't work fully for housing first, because you don't have enough variety. So some people will want a voucher. Some people, in order to be housed quickly, a strategy that is often utilized as master lease. Do you guys have master lease in Racine? I can just briefly explain what it is. So the agency is actually the tenant and rents the apartment, and then there's like an agreement or something like that happens with the tenant, the client moving into the apartment. But the benefit is that the landlord then is not having to do background checks, having to worry about income, having to, none of that, because the agency is responsible for this unit. The benefit is that we've found that people that have especially challenging criminal backgrounds, this is a way to get people to move in quickly. And then they've got some, hopefully some good stuff, some references. They've got a reference that they can use later, while that criminal background stuff is being figured out. Sometimes it's just a matter of time. The challenging part, if you're doing master lease, just to know as you go into it, is that you are then responsible for what happens in that unit. So having intensive services so that you can support clients in the apartments that you lease is important. Project-based is that here's the housing first building. So that's where you're like actually building a building that often has services on site. And some people want that. Some people want a kind of more program-based housing. Some people need that level of support to be housed independently. And so there's a real benefit to having some project-based, but forcing everybody into, a project-based building to be housed would not be housing first. And then there are other models that are coming up. Tiny homes is one that is being talked about a lot. As long as the tiny homes are permanent and not transitional, that would be used for a housing first kind of program. You could use tiny homes as kind of emergency housing within a housing first approach, as long as you have those low barrier pieces. Okay, I'm checking out the chat. Oh, Halo's doing master lease. Sorry that I did not see that. Cool. Let's see. Okay, and Lori says she'd be interested in receiving more information as to who probation and parole can reach out to when we have a client on supervision with chronic homelessness. Teresa, maybe I'll turn this over to you. Who would people reach out to from probation and parole?
Good question. I believe I'm going to toss that to Arida.
Well,
Or
and we can
Holly.
talk about this later. I just put it
That's
in the
true.
chat because some of what she was saying was really interesting to hear. So again, we can talk about that later.
That sounds good, Lori. Thank you.
And I will say that we have not yet done this with the coalition, but we've been focusing on at the state level, the Department of Health Services, but we did present to the Interagency Council on Homelessness, which has all of the departments there. And I wonder if we could, the Wisconsinites, could think about how we are serving people on probation and parole a little bit differently, and maybe with a housing first framework, because I know that there are some housing resources coming directly from corrections, but nothing is permanent, and they often start then go from a temporary thing to then utilizing our homeless system. And I wonder if there's a way that we could be more streamlined. I'll just put that out there.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. Thank you.
I think we could be more streamlined if we wanted to be, but we'd have to be creative, I think. Okay, so consumer choice and self-determination, and I'll talk about these in a little bit more depth in a little bit with some of our other, because there are two best practices that the Housing First literature actually recommends that you implement in your programs. So just briefly, people need a variety of options for housing and services. In an ideal world, we would be able to say, what do you want? And then make sure that we support both financially and with services to get that for them. That's not always realistic. I'm thinking about a guy who's moving into an apartment as we speak here, but he is he's on the sex offender registry, and he uses a wheelchair, and wanted a unit specifically on the east side of Milwaukee. And it just, as much as we tried, that we couldn't find either it was a place where he was not allowed to live because of his sex offender status, or it wasn't accessible. So anyway, sometimes that thing doesn't exist. The magic thing that they want doesn't exist, but we can try our best. Services are optional for them to engage in, but mandatory for you to provide. And we could talk about that in a little bit, but the services are so important to Housing First. And I think as collectively, because HUD has said be housing first and be low barrier, we've focused on that, but we haven't focused on how we support people after. And so what it often looks like is a case manager with a caseload of 20 to handle all of the services. And that's a lot. And I think we're doing the best that we can, but we need to figure out how to invest in services to fully implement Housing First, and a variety of services. And then this Housing First needs client-driven, creative, out-of-the-box thinking. Okay, so one of the principles that has a recommended best practice with it is recovery orientation, and harm reduction is the best practice that is recommended. Are folks familiar with harm reduction? Okay. At the risk of going too deep, I don't want to bore people, but I also don't want to gloss over anything and then people, walk away with a different understanding. So harm reduction started in the substance use world as an alternative to abstinence. And so the focus is on safety and reducing harm, and eventually reducing use, because that use is often harmful when we're at the point of harm reduction. So it's focused on safety versus just stopping altogether. And the work is in partnership. So it sounds like I'm seeing that this, let's pick on heroin use. This heroin use is problematic because you've got this eviction notice due to, illegal use of substances. So what are we going to do about that? Versus I had a person that was saying that they were helping the person reduce harm by asking them to leave so that, or if they didn't stop using heroin. I was like, that's not it. That's not it. So it's really focusing on how do we reduce the risk and get you to be more safe versus stopping the behavior completely. SAMHSA has some good information on harm reduction. And I have some examples here because this is the kind of stuff that often comes back to coordinated entry after we place somebody, where they're saying like, what do we do now? Like here they are, but I don't know what to do. So for Nate this is the one where I was thinking of. Nate was at risk of eviction because his parties are loud and people are using illegal drugs. So now he's got this violation and he's got a notice. So instead of focusing on like, you just have to stop using, we can talk about what are your options here. Can the parties happen safely elsewhere? Can they be smaller? And also, does Nate have control over his unit? This is something that we come across often when there are parties and violations. Often people will say, look, I didn't want this to happen, but I love my brother and I want to see him. And every time I invite just him to hang out, then he brings drugs and then he's calling his friends and then it gets out of control. Or even worse than that, folks that owe, we hear this a lot, folks that owe money, then the apartment is really not theirs. They owe money. And so we're using your apartment for this. And that's not safe. That's not a safe position for them to be in. So what do we need to do so that Nate has better control over his unit? Another example that comes up often is Charlotte being at risk of eviction because she's working out of her apartment. Her work is sex work, and so some of her dates become violent toward the property. So first and foremost, how can she be safe while she's working? And is there other work that she can do that replaces that income? So thinking about what it would look like to leave the sex trade. What does that look like? And what do you need to do that? The number one thing we hear from women often is, I need cash. This is how I'm surviving. And so what's going to replace that cash? And the third one is that Ben that also comes up. These are probably the top three that come up. Ben has stopped taking his medications. They were making his thoughts fuzzy and slow. And now he's at risk of eviction because he's been up late and he's screaming and banging on the walls. So would he be willing to try maybe a different medication so that he's not, focusing on this is not this is not working for the unit, and how is he feeling? Is there maybe a different medication that would not make his thoughts fuzzy and slow, but also not have him be so tormented at night? Or is there another unit that might work better? Is there one at the end of the hall? Is there a different unit, maybe a smaller building? Or sometimes a larger building works if it's, so that it's the noise kind of blends in with what else is going on in the building. So with all of these, the work that usually the inn to have these kinds of discussions is back to being that housing focused. So with that messy apartment example I gave, at least what we find is, when you're focused on, I want to help you keep this housing and I want to help you live the life you want to live, then we can start to have some of these conversations coming at it from that angle versus the judgment that people feel when we're talking about how you need to stop using heroin, or you really shouldn't be trading sex for money. Like, look at what's happened to you, that kind of thing. So harm reduction is really focused on how we get people to be more safe, not just how you stop it. Okay. It looks like there's just good conversation in the chat. I don't know that there are any questions.
No questions
Someone's-
right now.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. Another best practice is motivational interviewing with that comes from that principle of individualized supports. So I had said earlier that the services are optional for them, but mandatory for you to provide a variety of services. And one technique for discovering what services people need or want, what support they might want, is to use motivational interviewing. This again came from the substance use world, but it works in all kinds of change that someone's trying to make. I use it even with my family members for change that they might want to make. So I find it to be an effective model. So there's lots of resources out there if folks aren't familiar. And I would encourage you to sign up for a training and keep going to trainings regularly. This is one of those things, as with harm reduction, that you can learn it once, but you're never done. It's always good to talk things through, keep brushing up on skills and that kind of thing. Let me see if okay, good. I go into more detail here. So the motivational interviewing spirit and process is really around doing this together, working with a person who is the expert on their own life, but evoking from them what change they might want and supporting whatever choices they make about that change in a caring way. And so we do this by engaging people wherever they are and helping them to focus on the area of change that's needed. And then drawing out ambivalence toward change to help them think through what is my next step. And then to do that, there are some core skills to use. So this is OARS, OARS. And this is something that when I was, well, still, I guess I do a little bit of direct practice, but when I was doing direct practice all day long, there would be moments where I would say, oh, in my head, here is an opening. I'm going to ask some open-ended questions about this and see where it goes. And sometimes we would get all the way through to really talking about change. Often we wouldn't. So it's not something where you just like sit down and say, this is your motivational interviewing session now. It's something that is used in conversation with people just on a regular basis on that, to going toward that life stability. How are we helping people focus on what they need to change for life stability? And so I'm going to use Nate. So Nate is the guy that was having the parties and is now has that eviction notice. And so instead of saying something that would be like a yes or no answer, ask him how it went. Ask him what was good about having folks over, and also maybe what worries him. One of the things I learned with motivational interviewing right away is that there are benefits to bad behavior. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. For my own life, it tastes really good to eat lots of ice cream, and I do that way too often. So, but I'm going to have health effects down the road. So, as much as a doctor can tell me, like, you really shouldn't do that because you're going to have all these, and they can give me all the literature on what diabetes is like and what you're right. It doesn't mean that I'm going to just change because of that, because I am getting benefit from eating too much ice cream. So there are benefits to the behaviors that we are engaging in, even if it's unhealthy for us. And then affirming with Nate, affirming him as a person, that, I know that you want to be a good tenant in this unit. He has disclosed that his brother has come over and this always happens, and he's worried and feeling shameful about how it got out of control. And so affirming that, you really do care about your brother, and also you deserve your own space that you have control over. And so then throughout the conversation, being able to reflect back on what he wants and start eliciting some of that change. So you want to keep this apartment, but the parties are putting that in jeopardy. You want to keep a good relationship with your brother, but he's not respecting your wishes. And so then in this theoretical conversation, now we're at the point where I can open the door to say, what do you think about thinking through how to figure out how to keep a good relationship with your brother, but that doesn't jeopardize your lease? And if he's there, this is only if he's there, because if he's not, if I'm not ready to talk about reducing my ice cream intake, I am not, it's only going to make me feel bad to try to push that conversation on me. But if I'm starting to think about it, and then maybe it's time to start talking about, okay, so what options do you have? If you want to keep that relationship with your brother, you could say that there's no more coming over. You could suggest somewhere else. You could tell him, I can't have any guests. And a technique that we use that sometimes people avail themselves of is to say that I'm imposing the rule. The program is imposing the rule. Sometimes that's an easier thing to say, you know what, I can't, to the brother, I can't do this because the program has said no. And sometimes that's an easier out when it's not them. So you probably can think of other options. And if this were a real situation, he would be thinking of some options too, because we're exchanging information and both bringing expertise from what we know to figure out what the most viable next option is. This does not happen in one session. It does not happen just, and then we implement it and it's all good. I think, with the ice cream example, right? I can make a plan and maybe my plan is to not have ice cream in the house. And then the next time I go grocery shopping, I just have to get some, right? So, but then I can try again. So it's a technique to use to help people really focus on what is putting my housing at jeopardy and what's keeping my life from being all that I want it to be. And then where do we move from here? I use this example as a these are some of our toughest examples, but Teresa made a good point in another meeting that we were at that it doesn't have to be this serious, right? So Housing First also could have, folks that don't have any kind of substance use issues or they're not engaged in any illegal activities, and maybe they're not even taking prescriptions for serious and persistent mental illness. But there are still things in their life that were rocky and unstable that created this homelessness situation. So the first thing is to resolve that homelessness by housing people. But then how do we support them to get to life stability? So whether that is supporting somebody through figuring out why they can't keep and why they can't get and keep a job at the level that they want to work at, for example. Maybe they're tired of working at McDonald's and want to do something different. Or, maybe there's something there's some interpersonal stuff with family that has caused chaos in their life and they're trying to figure that out. So they're, runs the gamut, the issues run the gamut. And our job is to really, as service providers, say, how can we support you so that you can keep housing, not return to homelessness, and get all that you want in your life. And a piece of that we forget, so the fifth principle is community integration. And I think people forget this simply because we're so focused on, often, again, I'm one person and I have 20 clients. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just trying to make sure that no one's evicted. I'm trying to make sure that people are supported. I'm trying to make all those referrals. I'm just trying to get to my visits. I'm just trying to see people. And that's about what I can do. But we're not fully implementing Housing First if we're not thinking about community integration. This is another reason why that one Housing First building is not fully Housing First. Because part of community integration is to have our physical locations be diverse and integrated into the community. This is the last couple of weeks, we've got one apartment building in Milwaukee that we're having to fight to keep. There's some pressure to not have it, and it's on the east side, which is, for those familiar with Milwaukee, that's a coveted area to live and definitely to develop. And so we're having to fight to keep that building open, and it's a supportive building. It's a project-based building. So everybody in there was formerly homeless. And then there's another building that we're working to utilize for warming. This keeping in mind that we still haven't beat COVID, so we've got to figure out how we have those single room occupancy. And I could talk about the success that we found and why I think it's successful, but there are lots of reasons that we want to do warming differently. And we found this perfect building, but it is right, it's in Milwaukee, but nestled up against 2 suburbs. And it's a fight. So we have been fighting to make sure that apartment buildings, that where we are located and what's available to people is is where we would live, right? So it's like all throughout the community, and that we don't create just like one location where people are. And that services focus on connection to community. So CCS, if folks are familiar with comprehensive community services, I think it can be a great option for giving people more options in terms of services. It doesn't have to be so case management focused. CCS allows for that. And how are we, if I am, one case manager to 20 clients, how am I supporting people knowing about neighborhood events and what's in their community? And then how do we create community within programming? So recovery also includes engaging in normal activities, not just clinical ones. There was a study that our Milwaukee Behavioral Health Services team did that found that, at the time I was surprised, but now I'm not, that people who engaged in employment were able to reduce and sustain their drinking, reduce and then sustain that level of drinking. But people who had income, so like working on helping them get SSI alone, did not have any relationship to their reduced use. And at the time, I was like, what? No, people just need income to live. And, but really it was when we dug down deeper and did some qualitative work with folks, the feedback was that they had something else to live for. So what we didn't do, but it would be interesting to have done, to see, well, what if you have SSI, but you're engaged in some kind of volunteer thing, or you're, doing something else that maybe isn't paid because you're not able to work, but are there ways that you can find purpose and meaning beyond work? And would that help with your sobriety, or at least reduced use? So recovery includes engaging in those quote unquote normal activities. In Milwaukee, we have a peer collective of folks that are currently housed in our programs. And we all have this, right? There's a mandate that you get input from the people that you're housing in the programs that you provide. And so pre-pandemic, it was very transactional, this peer collective. So it was like, you're together, you're giving us feedback, we're taking that feedback. We might ask you for you to give us feedback on a specific thing, or you might elicit that. But it was very transactional, very much about feedback for the programs. In the pandemic, it has kind of happened organically. People were feeling more isolated, and as a part of the peer collective, the person that's kind of helping to co-chair that group saw that, and so they started to do things more socially, and the group has really been strengthened by doing things together, and it's now this cohesive group of folks that are such an asset to what we're doing. So is there a way that we can create community within our programming? So I will just kind of close by reminding us that housing first is housing first, not housing only. We have those 5 principles of housing first to fully implement. And when you're thinking about kind of wherever you're coming from, how do your goals relate to the housing first principles? And what do you need support with that you can advocate for systemically? So using power of the alliance here to advocate for that. And of course, you could join the Housing First Coalition to help us advocate at a statewide level. And then what is within your control that you can change right now? So whether you're a housing provider or not, if you're, a case manager, what can you change in your practice? If you are a service provider that provides ancillary services, what can you do? And then if you're at that director's or supervisor level, what can you do to programmatically or agency-wide to embrace and be more housing first? I'll just leave you with those thoughts. Stop sharing and then open it up to questions, or look at that 10 o'clock on the dot. So if there are questions or feedback, comments.
Good timing, Emily. So we had a lot of good conversation going on within the chat. And this would be a time for people to just jump in and ask questions. We have time here, so offer your thoughts, your questions, need for clarity, anything like that. And now it gets quiet.
I'm going to just
People-
chime in. Oh, sorry,
Sure.
Emily.
Go
I just
ahead.
wanted to chime in and just say I am so thankful for having this presentation. I appreciate the fact that you gave this presentation. You do a fabulous job at touching all of the points and giving some great analogies involved as well. I do want to say that in Racine, we are practicing that through our coordinated entry system. So that's fabulous. And you did mention about the availability of our community's use of vouchers. And that has been a great area where we have been able to partner with our housing authorities, both in Racine County. So that's big kudos. With the housing authority, we built that bridge with them in partnership to use our Section 8 vouchers and make referrals over to the housing authority for clients who are experiencing literal homelessness. And also with the emergency housing vouchers with WIDA. So we have two separate housing authorities that basically cover voucher availabilities. And in Racine, we're almost at 95 clients who have accepted referrals over for vouchers. 22 vouchers are currently, between the two agencies, are currently already turned over to using their vouchers. I will say with WIDA started in October, and then with the Housing Authority of Racine, we have 11 vouchers right now in clients' hands. We're looking for landlords that would be willing to change their practice of maybe not taking Section 8 vouchers because they thought clients were left on their own, and trying to get them to understand that we are helping and supporting clients through that process and walking them through the full gamut of applying for the voucher and getting the voucher in their hands and trying to find units and doing HQSs if that's possible in some of our housing authorities, so that way we can pass units and get open our inventory basically for more availability of subsidies. But a great thing for me to keep in mind that you kind of put into this was making sure that we're also talking about those community connections and making sure our clients are aware of how to also feel valued, even though they'll have the subsidy attached when they're in their unit, is feeling a contributing partner of our community. Many of them are contributing partners already, so I don't want that to be a stigma, but just something that I thought about that you kind of pointed out was that even during our case conferencing meetings, that I need to remember to always talk about that as well. So thank you for this. It was informative to me. As many times as I've gone through Housing First conferences and presented, it's still something that you'll always learn. So never a complete expert and know it all. So I appreciate this.
Thanks, Arida. I think that Milwaukee has actually learned from Racine in terms of the housing authority connection. So, so good work.
We learn from each other. I think
Yes.
you're the #1 person who taught me how to conduct a housing case staffing conference. So we are working together always in
We are.
Wisconsin. So I'm very happy that the 4 COCs work together and not only on leadership, but also in coordinated entry. So kudos to all of us as we work through and learn from each other.
Awesome.
Holly has her hand up. Holly, go ahead.
Just needed to unmute. Can you all hear me okay?
You
Yes.
can.
Okay. First of all, I appreciate the information on motivational interviewing. And if I could get the link to that, the one that was hot on your screen obviously wouldn't let me click to it, but
Yes.
you know, that would be great if I could get the link to that. So one of the things that, as Arida was saying, we are partnering with HARC. So I know that at Halo, at least, we've committed to providing at least 6 months of case management for the folks that take the EHV vouchers through HARC, and we could go a little bit longer with specific selected clients under certain circumstances. You know, it's our experience that some of them, you know, kindly tell us to buzz off after a couple of months of getting in there. So it could kind of, you know, balance itself out a little bit. But I was really interested in some of what you were talking about creative solutions and thinking outside the box. And some of that you may have addressed under the motivational interviewing, but I wondered if you could say a little bit more about some of those creative outside the box thoughts, or if there are ways of brainstorming, if you guys have like periodic brainstorming meetings that could be filtered down to us, because I know sometimes all of us, and I'm pretty sure I speak for everybody on this call, we could start banging our heads against the wall with some of this, trying to link people up with housing.
Yeah. Gosh, now I'm trying to think in Milwaukee, because that's where my bulk of my experience is, some of the creative things that we've done. I think, you know, money always helps. So some of the creative things that we've done is to find pockets of money that aren't restricted, especially when somebody is struggling, and say, hey, landlord, that's usually when it comes up. Hey, landlord, you know, we're going to incentivize you or support you in taking this person. We've also had to be creative with how we present housing, especially to folks that are, you know, struggling with a psychotic disorder where they're kind of paranoid or delusional about what we're actually offering, and to try to hold their hand as much as possible through that. We did find that, at least here, if the person was born in Milwaukee, we can take a medical record, and the person, if they're able to go to get their birth certificate, which has been hugely helpful for reducing barriers, because sometimes people just aren't able to organize themselves enough to get to that point of getting their birth certificate themselves. We do have meetings. We have every Thursday, we have what's called a housing support staffing, which is just where anyone's able to come, and we talk through challenging situations and try to come up with solutions. So I mean, we'd be happy to open that up. If I could send everyone I could send you all the link, and we could make it a, you know, Milwaukee Racine housing support staffing, if folks are interested in that, and kind of join forces there.
I mean, I think that sounds great. You know, I know everybody is really busy, and I'm not sure, you know, time-wise, but if it's something that we could just be invited to, and people could come when they could, or when there is an issue that they wanted to bring up, I think that sounds wonderful. I mean, the more people working on solutions and the more ideas, the better we are.
Yes, absolutely. That's why we knew that we just needed to open it up. The more brains, the better. So it really is just a come as you need to kind of staffing.
Great, thanks, Emily.
I'm sorry, questions? Thank you all for listening to me. and for engaging. I will make sure that Teresa has the slides and then I don't know, Teresa, is it best if I send you the invite for the housing support staffing and you can forward it to people who want it, or they could
You
email me
can-
and I can forward it to them?
You can
That's
send it to me, and if it's the same every month,
Yeah.
I can just put it in our email newsletter,
Okay.
and then they will have it. And yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
And then the PowerPoints you can send to me.
Okay.
And then also I upload this. I will try to do that today. Usually I'm able to do it the same day to YouTube. And I will put the link to the meeting, to the presentation up on our website. So there you will be infamous in our meetings.
Oh, great. No, but it's good that people can watch if they weren't able to attend.
Yes. Any other questions? Any other, nothing? Well, thank you so much, Emily, for this presentation. It was very informative and we appreciate it. And maybe we will have you back again to discuss some of the other things that you kept saying. Well, this would be a whole nother presentation.
That would be good. Yes,
Yeah.
let's plan on that.
Okay, very
All
good.
right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
At this time, I am going to, Holly, did you want to say something? No? Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask Arida, she was going to talk a little bit more in depth about our partnership with the Housing Authority, Racine County.
Yeah, kind of snuck a little bit of that in when talking to Emily, but I will just give a brief about what we are doing right now in Racine with our partnership with the Housing Authority, Racine specifically, and then I'll piggyback at the end about WIDA. So in March, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Housing Authority to use our coordinated entry system and kind of pair rental assistance from the Section 8 vouchers that are available at the Housing Authority with supportive services from our street outreach or emergency shelter agencies for clients so they can be stably housed. That happened in March. We had started sending over referrals. We prioritized households on our priority list that were the longest stayers or longest episodes of homelessness at this point. We found that to be a gap group of clients that weren't getting served with our permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing resources. And so we prioritized 35 households. 33 of the households accepted offers for referrals to Housing Authority. As of today, 23 households were invited to a briefing, and those referrals were accepted by the Housing Authority. 3 clients out of the 33 were denied referrals, one because of an ineligibility beyond Housing Authority's ability to do anything. One client got that denial reversed at a reconsideration, so that's great, and is being invited over to a voucher. And then though the client that was denied, actually we were able to secure housing. So that was fabulous that we were able to secure housing. We're still working with the only client that was denied. Currently, we have 11 clients holding a Section 8 voucher that is being supported by either our street outreach or emergency shelter staff and looking for units. So definitely looking, again, I'll keep plugging out there that we're looking for landlords that would be willing to take a Section 8 voucher. Just about all of the vouchers we're looking for are 1-bedroom units. Again, that's a high demand in Racine, is to find 1-bedroom units. Again, this is paired with supportive services, so the client does need to be connected with their case manager while they're trying to find a unit and being walking through that process. The agencies that are working under this voucher is Burlington Transitional Living Center, Halo, Women's Resource Center, and Hope Center. So we're looking forward to continue getting more vouchers. This is just the first 11. They're cycling through as we come along. So, and then with WIDA, we have 62 referrals that were sent over to WIDA. 22 are currently already using their vouchers. So that's already moved along. That's been running since October. So it's now we finally got clients in. I think starting in May, we started getting the leases turned over from what were permanent supportive housing or a rapid rehousing unit to now using the Section 8 voucher. So that frees up units to be able to use with our permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing to take new clients into that program, those programs. So this is really exciting. The little silver lining that came out of COVID is the fact that there's been more resources coming into the community, and it started much more pushes between other funding that can help us solve our homeless situations in Racine County. So Becca has been taking the big lead on this, having a housing navigator, and her focus being on building these relationships with the partner agencies and helping being a central point of communication between housing authorities and case managers, and passing along the information has been tremendous. She's also on the line here. I don't know if I missed anything. Becca, feel free to chime in, but we're super excited about this move. So any questions from anybody else?
No, I don't hear any.
I don't either. So, but I'm super excited. So we're looking forward to continuing this process and continuing to have more vouchers, and let us know. I'm going to throw Becca's email in the chat box in case somebody knows of a landlord that they're working with that maybe we can re-engage with to find out if they're willing to take Section 8 vouchers or any subsidies and support service programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Arida. And Becca, thank you for the hard work that you're doing, getting people placed and navigating between landlords and case managers and clients. That's difficult work, and I definitely want to acknowledge that hard work that you're putting in there to get those clients housed. So kudos to you for that work. I'm going to briefly make sure I lift up the new business for August 18th. Gay and I have been working hard with HUD TA, and also just trying to recover from all of the concerns and issues that went on with COVID. During the time of COVID hitting through, I would say, the past few months, HUD had instructed CoCs nationwide to kind of put aside any of the structure and organizational things that they were working on that we could, and focus primarily on waivers and changes and keeping clients safe, keeping staff safe. And so that's pretty much what we ended up doing, not necessarily because HUD asked us to, but because everything was intense with trying to get people housed, trying to keep things going. We are at a point right now where we are looking at having a special meeting on Friday, August 18th at 9 o'clock, and you will receive written notification of this. But at this point, we've had a leadership council working, and our governance document that we're working off of states that the membership of the whole needs to vote on the leadership council. And we have gotten away from that, so we need to move back to that. We are going to ask, and I have this in your agenda so you can read it again, and that we are going to ask for the leadership, for the membership here to approve the leadership continuing with less than 15 council members through November 30th. of 2022 to get us to an annual meeting rather than we have, I believe, 3 or 4 people who have had to resign for different jobs. They have left the county for different reasons. So rather than having a special election for replacing those vacancies, we are asking to continue with the less than 15, which is stated that we need on our governance, but also to affirm the current leadership council positions, people that are in those positions, to serve through November 30th of 2022. In September, or through August, I keep thinking we're in August, through August, then I will be activating our nominating committee, just double checking with everybody that was on it before to see if they will be willing to continue to serve. And we will send out information for August and September for people who would be interested in being a part of the Leadership Council, which oversees the HUD compliance and also the larger annual meetings that we have. And we will explain a little bit more about how these annual meetings are for HUD compliance, but also we will continue with this group as a outreach arm of the CoC. So it sounds a little complex and we will go into it a little more clearer. And I will send out more information so that you can see what requirements would be to be a part of the Leadership Council, which is pretty much anybody who's a member of the CoC, which is this larger group here, plus people who do not attend, but consider themselves a part of the annual meetings. And I just wanted to bring that up to you. Then in November, we will have our annual meeting. We will host it as an annual meeting, and we will have elections and we will set terms. We will just kind of tighten up our organization's structure and make sure that we're functioning the way we should be functioning, and COVID be damned. That's all that I have to announce at this point in time. I just wanted to lift that up so everybody was aware of it. And at this time, I am opening to anybody have any announcements that you would like to make for community connections, any new hires, any events going on, anything there, Scott?
Before that, I don't actually, but on the topic of those meetings, special meeting and annual meeting, it looks like, we're by a little after 10, our attendance here is down to like 21, including yourself and some people. So attendance is very low here. So I really would suggest that if we're going to have important meetings like that, that we get repeated reminders out with the link very early, so that people can get that. Because if we're going to have an annual meeting that has a function, we need to have a good attendance at it.
Right, and that will. That's why we're announcing it today, just to get it on everybody's radar, and it's in the agenda. And then we will be sending out separate notices in the next, as soon as I meet with Gay and we get everything set, we will send that announcement out in September regarding the November meeting, or August if we have that set up early, because we do need to have information out early for people to, if they want to serve on the council, to be able to nominate themselves or have nominations. So yes, that will all follow with early timing.
So I'm sorry, I have a question. So the announcement will come out in September if we're interested in joining the membership.
I'm hoping that it will come out in August with the August information that will have all the, the what's your bio, what area do you fit according to what HUD says that we should have represented. And so I'm not waiting until September, but knowing how sometimes it takes a while to get people, and we need 15 people. I'm hoping some people will remain on the Leadership Council that were on it now. And then, yes, we do want more people. So that information, you will definitely have more information on the 18th.
Oh, great, because I'm interested in joining.
That's fine, yes. And it will be the vote that will take place in November. So we should have the slots filled prior to sending a notice out. If we send the notice out around the time that we normally would have, I'm assuming we'll have 15 people slated by the time we would normally have had when we used to have our every month meeting, which would mean it would be a month prior to the annual meeting that we would have notification of everybody who has been nominated and has accepted. And so 30 days should be enough to notify everybody again of this, remind them of the special meeting, which will come out again in August, that there'll be an annual meeting, and then getting nominations and nomination committee moving on and all of that. So yes, that's why I'm announcing it now. Any updates or questions? Nicole, you're muted. There you go.
All right. I just thought I'd take a moment to say hello. Since I am in a brand new position, I'm Nicole Hunt. I'm the new planning coordinator with Racine CoC Community Action Agency. This is actually my first week on the job. And I know that there are a number of names I see on the call who know me. I've been working in the nonprofit sector for over a decade, a number of different agencies in Racine and Kenosha. And the last role I had prior to this one was managing grants for PADS, the homeless program in Lake County. So I have a strong background in grants, worked with a number of federal programs throughout my career. So I'm excited to meet everyone and reconnect with those of you that I've known for many, many years. So I look forward to seeing everyone more.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Nice
welcome
to meet
back,
you.
Nicole.
Thank you.
Any other updates? I know Safe Haven is doing their golf outing today and it's raining. I hope everything is going well for them.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I update you on what RRP has been doing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've been busy. So we just finished a house on Erie Street. We were going to sell it. It's a duplex, 2-bedroom upper, 3-bedroom lower. But the board and I decided to keep it as a rental. Right now, no home funds or any dollars were used. So if anyone's looking for, and I was going to talk to Holly too, the 2-bedroom unit is going to be $1,000. The lower 3-bedroom unit is going to be $1,250. This house has been rehabbed from ground up. It's absolutely stunning inside. So, and the other two we're going to have for sale quickly is 620 Hubbard. I'm going to be done with that probably mid-August. That's going to go on the market as first-time home buyers. It's a large house, 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, on the corner of Hubbard and Erie, just up the street from the lake. Obviously, it's going to be for sale for affordability. Way under market. I don't know what the price is going to be yet. So please look out for that. That's going to be a beautiful home all done. And then I just started Center. That's just, that's a smaller house, a smaller 3-bedroom, 1-bath, large yard. And hopefully that's going to be done in 2 months. And that's going to be on sale for a first time home buyer, low income home buyer. And then the triplex should be started. So if anyone's interested in any of those homes or just let me know. Be more than happy to talk to you and we could do, it's not done yet. We're going to have an open house, but if you guys are interested in seeing it and see what we do, let me know and I'll let you in, not a problem.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Anybody else? Be quiet. I did put in your,
Sorry.
oh, Brendan.
I was going to introduce Brittany Brown, but she had to run to the restroom real fast. Brittany is our new compliance specialist, taking over my old position here at the city, and she will be coming around, meeting people, taking over contracts, a lot of that work. So you guys are definitely are in great hands, and she and I are working together as a team, very similar to how Matt and I always did, or, back in the day when it was Laura and Ben, all of that. So very excited to have her on
Great. Thank you. One thing when I sent out the information for the agenda and the link, I also included, people were asking about doing a directory, but the family, there's a family resource directory, and Sarah Hawks said that they are in the process of updating it for fall release. So there's an August 1st, I believe, deadline. So all your information that you need is on there. The web links are active. Please review if you have your agency services in there, and make sure that they're updated. And if not, and you want to be in there, please be sure to send the information to Sarah. Her contact information is in the email there, so you can connect to her. Okay, anything else? Any other updates? Going once, going twice, hearing none, seeing none. And I have a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Who first it?
I'll
So moved.
there-
Okay, Kathy first, Holly second. All those that, anybody disagree? No? Okay, all those in favor, please log off. Mary Beth, please stay on.
Thanks for backing me up, Holly.
Always, Kathy.